Friday. Welcome to another episode of Crypto with English. We're flipping the script a little bit today. So, for this episode, the primary focus is going to be artificial intelligence within this greater conversation of Web3. And although, many of our episodes tend to focus on blockchain, cryptocurrency, NFTs, metaverse, and things like that, I think one of the lesser focused aspects, but probably one of the most important, is going to be artificial intelligence and the things related to that. Machine learning, and things like that. So, I'd like to warmly introduce today's guest, who definitely has some subject matter expertise on this. Kate Arndt, she's the senior sales exec at Vanti Analytics right here in New York City. So, Kate, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you about, some really fun topics.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you kind of found yourself in this space. I think, especially since the pandemic, a lot of people have made either like a lateral move or some sort of journey into this space, and people tend to have a rather, unique story as far as getting there. Myself included. So, yeah, talk about yourself a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I guess at the highest summary, I consider myself very curious. I like to learn a lot and read a lot about various topics. So I'm a bit of a generalist, I'd say. And so that said, my education is in industrial and manufacturing engineering, but I went into a more sales engineering role right out of school. I worked for ExxonMobil, and really great experience. But while I was there, I was doing a lot of stuff outside of my day job that got me into all these, I guess, other projects, other interests, other passions, and ultimately led me to, like you said, kind of seek out a different opportunity, go a different direction. I chose to get into AI for manufacturing. And then kind of on the side, it's been one of the consistent things that I'm interested in is cryptocurrencies and NFTs and all of the things that make up Web3, just because it's, changing the world, changing the way that we're living, and really cool stuff to learn about. So, and also participate in. So, really, I just follow my curiosity, and that's what got me here.
Awesome. And could you talk a little bit about Vanti, analytics? How you ended up coming into that opportunity, and perhaps some of the projects you and the team are working on.
Sure. So, kind of that background in manufacturing, and then the industrial engineering degree helped me out a lot with the analytics component because
Sure.
it's basically a math degree. And I mean,
Not an easy one either.
no, a lot of statistics, but really fun stuff comes from it. And so, yeah, I guess it kind of fit both my skill set and my interests, in that, I really truly believe AI is changing the world. And so when I found a company that specializes in AI for manufacturing, I, just decided it was a really good fit. And it has proven to be that in my experience thus far.
Awesome. And speaking of artificial intelligence, you have a very unique background as to engineering, and you mentioned manufacturing as well. So, how is AI scaling, manufacturing? I think often the mental image that we often associate with manufacturing is kind of like the early 20th century conveyor belt, and you see really a line of workers putting together, I guess you could say a separate part for kind of the greater product. So I don't know, somebody's attaching a winch, somebody's attaching maybe like some sort of shell piece for something. So if you can talk about where AI is or how AI is taking manufacturing to even greater heights.
Right. So, like you mentioned, that picture you've painted is perfect, right? So I think actually industrial engineering only was created in like 1902 or something, for the purpose of optimizing and changing the manufacturing environment too. And so we've seen that progression in a lot of ways in automation and what we like robotics and basically kind of replacing some of the manual components of manufacturing and inserting robots and machines in automation in its place. And that was, what was the norm for a long time.
Right.
And now we are realizing that all of the machines, all of the robots, everything that's in within the manufacturing facilities produce data that is worth so much more than just storage payments. Because if you're paying for cloud storage, you're storing the data, you're not using it for anything. Maybe
Right.
in a way you can understand what's happening in real time, but you're not understanding what's going to happen in the future unless you're using AI and machine learning algorithms. That's really the gold that comes from leveraging this technology in manufacturing is it allows you to go from monitoring and being reactive to actually predicting and being proactive. We like to I was talking to a prospect once, and he was like, "I imagine, it's like Homer Simpson at the, nuclear power plant, and he's like looking at the, screen, waiting for it to turn red or green." And I'm like, "Yep, that's what was." And then one of our prospects too was saying, "Oh, in the future, like it's going to be like Waze. You're going to know if there's traffic up ahead. You'll be able to make a course correction before you get to the roadblock ahead." So
Right.
that's like the simple terms, but it's really cool stuff that comes from it.
That is an excellent analogy, especially somebody who definitely enjoys and grew up watching, watching the Simpsons. That is definitely a great analogy. So when it comes to, I think, blockchain, and I guess you could say the larger conversation of that, what should people know about AI's role in that? Because I think a lot of times, and this just might be the nature of the beast, so to say. But there is like a significant amount of almost over reporting when it comes to just Bitcoin in of itself. And there's so much more going on in this space. And actually, I probably say this like 100, 200 times on the show. There's so much more going on in this space, and it's more than just Bitcoin and Satoshis and everything else related to that. Not knocking on Bitcoin, but a lot of these projects that will emerge from blockchain are going to be somehow amplified by artificial intelligence. And it's going to be, like you said, this predictive versus reactive way of doing things, which I think is definitely going to make life way easier. So, talk about that a little bit. Talk about your thoughts as far as AI and blockchain and how that's really going to ramp up things.
So I'm probably a bit new, like as far as the convergence of these two themes, I'm certainly no expert on the intersection of them. But I definitely, and I think everyone does, we all see the potential there because these are two very, or not just two, but blockchain and AI and ML, they're very significant technology changes that have and hold so much potential and so many applications, like the limit probably doesn't exist. So the idea that they're going to converge in a way that's impactful across all the industries and various applications is huge. Certainly a more new, I think, opportunity, right? Web3 and AI and ML are kind of at their birthplace, I think.
Right.
Um, and so ultimately, though, I think AI and ML can be inserted into every single the way software is written moving forward. So there's a lot of opportunity, and it's essentially going to, I mean, at least in the manufacturing space, let's say a big challenge maybe is around data integrity or data quality, for lack of a better term. And so I think that incorporating a blockchain component into the data itself, and then therefore into AI and ML after, it's going to give a lot more, I guess, sound insights and real information that's more reliable than maybe without it. Obviously, there's some limitations,
Right.
but yeah, I think that there's just so much opportunity. But I'm fairly newer into that convergence part of it.
Got it. And and you definitely touched on some great points there as well. One of the first things that comes to mind are I guess you could say these AI algorithmic I guess you could say based programs that execute trades. For instance, many of them are highly sophisticated. Many of these AI, I guess you could say, type, trading applications used commonly, across the industry, and it is quite impressive as far as the depth and the nuanced, you could say, execution of the way these AI traders are able to, I guess you could buy and sell securities at various times. So I'm kind of curious, how smart is AI? Because I mean, there's so many movies about this, and I'm certainly not an expert, but I do, I have a little bit of familiarity to this. So, you mentioned the Simpsons analogy, which is great. And when I was a kid, Terminator 2 came out with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So that is effectively about an AI taking over the world in many ways, and then kind of creating these killing machines, so to say. So, where are we at in 2022 as far as the sophistication of AI? Like, I guess you could say certain aspects of AI are based or modeled after the human brain. Is that correct?
So I don't think so, to be honest. This is a big, I guess we can say it's controversial. So my opinion is that in it, only that it is definitely something that people have various, thoughts on. I personally think that AI is just math at this point. It is nowhere close to real intelligence or human intelligence. I mean, yeah, it's I think I said this on another. I think I've said this in the past, but it's also way better than humans are at things. So it's
Sure.
not that it's not as smart as people. Sometimes it's smarter because we're training it. It's like a super calculator, supercomputer.
Right.
But it's all the information and intelligence all comes from data that it's trained on. So it's not, generating ideas and thoughts on its own. I mean, I guess there's there's machine learned like I guess art, which is pretty cool, but it's still taking information from what it's seen and then creating art from it. So um, pretty simple building blocks if you break it down,
Sure.
but not really, yeah, not like the human brain. We have no idea how the human brain. I think we know way more about AI because we build it than versus the human brain itself.
Right. Yeah, and I guess the the greater point I was trying to get at, with AI, obviously there's aspects you can essentially train, so to say. I guess along the lines that you're saying, kind of the more data you're putting into it, probably the sharper of a tool it becomes, over time. So my feeling is that, are there, I guess you could say, data that you could throw its way where an AI can eventually just kind of start mimicking more complex behaviors,
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
such as uh, things as close as possible to almost autonomous decision making, like things
Yeah,
like that.
and I think there's a lot of companies that are doing that in a way that is I guess it feels almost human, right? So I think Google's really good at that, but Google, think about the data that Google has access to, right? They're taking
Right.
the data from the whole internet and using that to train AI. And so that AI is extremely intelligent and it mimics human behavior to an extent. You know, based on, especially in that the applications where it's like you're talking to another person, let's say, and that used to be the Turing test to try to understand if it's truly human intelligent. So they have so much data, to your point, that it makes it pretty remarkable as far as the intelligent feeling from it when you're interacting with it.
Wow. Very interesting. And yeah, by the way, that's very illuminating. So thank you on that. And as far as the actual coding and developing of AI, I guess you can say applications and programs themselves, for people who are looking to, let's say, start a career and explore that subject matter, where's a good starting point, let's say, as far as coding languages and certifications and perhaps even undergraduate or postgraduate degrees? I mean, obviously, your background and your degree, that is certainly no easy no easy degree to say the least. And as you've aptly mentioned, it is a math degree, and I'd imagine it's quite complex math, probably during those 4+ years as well.
Right. So I guess at Vanti, for example, the head of engineering is, or the head of data science, actually, he is an industrial engineer as well. We actually have quite a few on the team. I think it's a really good foundation. I know right now that there's a lot more targeted as we progress over time. I think when I was in school, there was nothing specific to AI
Right.
as far as the degree is concerned. But I do think there are more and more programs now that have more AI specific components to it. But ultimately, yeah, truly, it's you have to like math. And as far as the programming and computer science is concerned, that's almost an intersection. Computer engineering would be a really good place to start too. And all of these things are important for that convergence, with the Web3 considerations as well. So any language where it's being integrated into an application, I think it's going to change over time, which languages are most important. Python
Sure.
is a really big one as far as the actual programming of the models. But as on the front end, if you're talking about how AI will intersect on like the front end of Web3, it's the pretty typical standard front end coding requirements, I'd say.
Well said. And as far as current events or somewhat current events, and I think we're all still kind of going through this, the supply chain crisis. I would like to think that as we are in 2022, a lot of those things probably could have been mitigated with various aspects, implementations of AI. I mean, I would imagine very high quality data could have been extracted, throughout these past years, and I would imagine perhaps through AI, some of these events probably could have been predicted to an extent, and we may have been able to avoid some of it. I kind of wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Yes, I think in a way, yes. I think the how far along we'd have to be to have executed that properly, I think that would be far away. But I'm even thinking about like the toilet paper issue. If only we had AI tracking the data of all of that, maybe we would have understood that, hey, there's an anomaly happening here. Maybe there's going to be an issue with toilet paper at the beginning of COVID. Who knew?
Oh yeah.
But then, 2 years in with the supply issues, it's not like any historic data we would have had any historic data to teach us and understand those disruptions in the data that would have been happening in real time to understand what could result in the future. So that forecasting component is tough when the historical data has never shown something like that before. But certainly, there's so many areas, at least in manufacturing, that if we were using AI and ML, we would have a better handle on our waste, on our production, and on our output, which would have been very helpful with those shortages because uh, we wouldn't have been wasting so much material and energy. Maybe we would have been able to, at least have improved on our throughput at the end of the day.
Got it. And I got a message from an old colleague the other night, and I mentioned that you were coming on to the show today. So, for industrial engineering, what type of mathematics must you master and get through during those 4 years?
So I think I took at least one, or I took two, probably two at least math courses a semester. Uh, the basics, I think every engineer takes, and that's like over the first 2 years, you go through Calc 3, then you go to differential equations, and then in parallel, you're taking courses on matrices, and you're learning the statistics that I took, like stat classes that I took my
Yeah.
second 2 years, I can't even remember the names of what the courses were because the names were like 7 words long and like very complex.
I can
I just
imagine.
call it statistics, but it's I apologize. I don't remember what they're called, but certainly a lot of math. But it's fun. And we took, MATLAB, we took some programming classes as well because yeah, that whole convergence, if you're going to know a lot of math, it's helpful to know how to use tools that actually allow you to implement that knowledge into something useful.
Right. And I often get this question, when I have guests on, but are there any type of internships, uh, you could say externships, clinics that one should probably apply to and take, during their, industrial engineering, trajectory, if they start, if they choose that as a degree and, to continue that, beyond that.
So I think it depends on what they're looking to get into, right? I think that industrial engineers have a very wide scope of industries that they get into outside of school because we're about optimization. So it's almost like how AI and blockchain is very transferable across industries. The skills that an industrial engineer has is also pretty transferable. Some people will go into banking even. I went into energy. Most of my classmates though did go into manufacturing. I think it's because we had a specific uh, emphasis on that in my program. But yeah, I guess I'm also one for when it comes to these internship opportunities or when you're exploring what to do, it's kind of go in with your gut, which is not, maybe the right answer to your question, but I'm all for like try out what you're passionate about and go for it all in. And if you hate it, then you'll know how to pick one next time. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, and I totally understand that. And so, is a passion for mathematics, in your opinion, required? Because I do think a lot of times when people do think of math, there's almost a tangible fear. Oh, I'm not a math person. Oh, that's calculus, trigonometry. People tend to almost have a reflexive type of fear to that. So. Um, like I said, is a passion or an enjoyment for mathematics required, in your opinion, to really be efficient in this area?
Well, right now I'm in sales. So if they're looking to get into a more commercial path, then I wouldn't say that it's a requirement. I would say it's helpful because, having the engineering degree really helps me with my um, job, even in sales, being
Right.
able to understand the customer needs, being able to, explain that to the data science team. All of that is helpful, but I certainly wouldn't do industrial engineering if you hate math because it would be a long couple years. But it's really rewarding if you can get through it, but it's also if you're not going to use it, maybe or if your interests maybe lie more on like the computer science end of the spectrum with coding, I'd say maybe lean towards that direction, and you can also come into this like world from a different angle potentially.
Right, right, and that definitely makes a tremendous tremendous amount of sense. And as far as like the road ahead in like in 2022, 2023, and let's say we're just talking 5 years ahead of time, there is a general existential fear, but perhaps a practical one as well. AI replacing various aspects of the labor force in the United States. Some who are, you could say, a bit more optimistic feel that it's not going to per se replace, it's going to optimize, but it's also going to require newer job skills, newer training over time. I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, so it's definitely a complicated uh, topic, I think, because there will be a lot of changes, and we need to shift. If we're going to truly implement these technologies at scale, we need to completely disrupt our current organizations, the way they operate, the roles. our relationship with these technologies, and um, the industries, the companies, the organizations, and the people that do that sooner will uh, realize the benefits of the technology sooner and in a very exponential way, that people who are lagging behind, the industries that are lagging behind, the companies that are lagging behind are going to have a much harder time remaining in these positions. So I'd say it's something that we all need to think about as far as like shifting where our skill set lies and
Right.
figuring out how we can help utilize these tools and these new technologies in and also, you know, still have jobs that are relevant to that, and, you know, the industries that exist today. But the whole Web3, um, that even is going to completely change all the technology companies that exist today that are, you know, make a large part of their revenue is from the data that they collect on us in Web 2. You know, like the
Right.
fact that these tech companies, most of their money comes from advertising and the data that they get from us. That's going to change a lot with Web 3. So the way that our industries work will change as well. But there is a lot of need for people. You don't have to be a math person, you don't have to be an engineer to still be relevant in this space. There's still going to be a lot of jobs that are just different that this technology enables.
Right. Very good points raised, to say the least. And I kind of wonder this. No, I guess I'm thinking about this as a greater practice or as a greater theme. Do you think that education or the educational system in general should really be moving more towards a STEM, I guess you could say, type of tactic and strategy overall? Because I will have to say, it seems like it, regardless of wherever you're at in history, having a knowledge and mastery of technology and underlying, you could say, mathematics and theories is one of the pillars to move a society forward. So I have a son; he's 5 years old, and and I would tell him, once he's a little bit older, as far as careers, I would strongly recommend to him something within the sciences and mathematics. Now, I graduated from law school, but I do think STEM is the future and tends to always will be. Engineering, programming, that is probably what I would suggest to anybody as far as as far as both either kind of careers and kind of as a personal trajectory over time as well. And by the way, this isn't a dialogue to, let's say, knock on other degrees or other concentrations, but part of me feels that, kind of both as a parent and also as somebody who's in this industry, I think there needs to be a certain recalibration done right now, because there is almost kind of a reflexive fear, like, oh, I don't like math, I don't like sciences. Maybe we should make more of an effort to make students more comfortable. Maybe they don't know whether they're good or bad at it. Maybe it's kind of more of a, I don't know. Maybe it's more of a type of people kind of talking themselves out of it first before actually knowing.
Yes, I echo everything that you just said. Obviously, I am biased having that degree myself, but I'll talk about the benefits for it, you know, all day, every day, and just being glad that I went that path. I was lucky enough to have my dad tell me essentially what you were suggesting that you were thinking
Maybe
for
it's a
years.
parent thing. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that it has a lot of validity, right? Granted, you know, as technology and our world changes over time, our even our education paradigm is going to be a little outdated to,
Yeah.
you know, most of your points. You know, our ability to keep up with technology's ability to grow and change and shift is going to be funny too. You know, if you learned I don't know, Java like a couple years ago, and then they're changing, you know, the coding languages in 10 years, and that's no longer useful. Like, we're all going to have to continuously be self educating in order to keep up with the STEM growth. But to answer your more direct question, or be more direct to your question, I think that the STEM degree is by far a very valuable tool in general, gives you a lot of skills to be able to do those things, as far as, that foundation to problem solve and continuously learn. And as technology changes, and it really does set you up to fit in the world in a way that you can, I guess, find ways to get these occupations, should they be of interest to you, because we're always going to need, you know, what the other, we're always going to need what the other, I guess, degrees provide.
Right.
But this does give you, if you're interested at all in the STEM world, this gives you such amazing opportunities um, today, and it's only going to be growing over time. I think that there's a huge shortage.
Right.
Um, Maybe there's not even a huge shortage. There's just a huge demand for these roles currently, and it's only going to grow as technology does.
Got it. And the next question I have, this is really more of an economic one, not necessarily a political. But I came across this quote recently, and might have just been on one of these other podcasts I was watching. But the individual said this. Now, the Chinese government, their leaders are all engineers.
Mhm,
The US government, our leaders are all lawyers. And that is kind of the difference in the way things are done. And I thought about that, and I did my own due diligence, and I'm like, yeah, that actually is true. Um, Here in the United States, it is a disproportionately high amount of attorneys who are senators, congressmen, congresswomen, and of course, of course, even the current sitting president was an attorney as well. And also, kind of looking at, you could say our economic rival overseas, most of their leadership actually have engineering degrees and an engineering background. So I kind of wonder, and this is not necessarily a comparison, I kind of think it would do us some good if we actually had more engineers. Um, like in our system, especially if it comes to some of these very, very deep structural issues. I think for over 10 years, people have always talked about the infrastructure here in the United States. So as you know, you're in New York City, the public transportation has
mhm,
not been improved in any significant way. And by the way, not to knock anybody who, does, let's say, work, or, any type of staff or any type of special that works with it. But if we're to look at our public transportation in New York City, and let's say we're to compare that to what's going on in Tokyo,
mhm,
it's night and day. There is no comparison. Um, and if we look at the bridges and tunnels up here, if we're looking at if we're looking at parts of the Brooklyn Bridge or the Williamsburg Bridge or Holland Tunnel, George Washington Bridge, there's a lot of things that are left to be desired. And I think for anybody who lives up here, it's like we know this could be done, and it's
mhm.
not being done.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to know your thoughts. What if there was more engineers in leadership? I think that's a good idea, by the way. But
Oh,
that's
I love this. No, I love this. What a good topic. I've never thought about it in this way, but I'm glad you shared that, because, well, it did occur to me when, when they were interviewing like all the big tech people about privacy in Congress, like they were trying to figure out
right.
how our data was being protected. And we had these people who have no, like, less, like, I'm not trying to knock on them, but
No,
we have people
go
who
ahead.
are maybe not well acquainted with the technology, so they don't know the right questions to ask. And it's a problem. It's a problem if we, like, our legislation can't keep up with technology if it doesn't understand the technology. We need more people who are in charge to be able to understand the technology, and therefore then can write the legislation. But to your point, the implementation of the technology as well. It's like, to understand how to roll out efficient programs and, change things well. I'm curious now that you mentioned, Japan and China. I'm curious about like Germany. I'm wondering of the leadership of the places that
Oh,
are efficient. I'm like, are they all? Is that a common theme of the most efficient places? Like that would be really interesting to find.
oh yeah. By the way, so I was recently in Berlin. I have nothing but great things to say about Berlin. Talk about efficiency. Everything in that city. I guess you could say the whole theme of German engineering and efficiency that is reflected, I would say, in almost every street, sidewalk, uh, hotel, store that you go into. So, um, yeah, to your point, it really begs the question. And in fact, I feel, despite even coming from a law background, I would actually be actually more in favor of people who are actually doing things like that in STEM, in engineering, because I think here in the United States, I think there's really more attorneys and lobbyists that appear before Congress, and I don't think the role is to necessarily be a master of the subject matter. The role is to advocate and argue. So there's a much different end to that, as far as uh, you could say litigation, or you could say, or even just the role of, let's say, a lobbyist or an attorney in various contexts as well. And just anecdotally speaking, when I've dealt with engineers of various disciplines in this field, it is a much easier interaction, I have to say. It is, because if there is so if I ask a question, I get the answer and I get the nuances around that.
Mhm.
So to say, I don't I don't get this very litigious kind of mind battle, back and forth as well. So I guess, adding to that, I personally think there'd be much more to be gained by a larger amount of engineers in leadership, in my opinion.
I agree. Yeah, it's like I think engineers have a real respect for finding out the answer. That's why I liked math so much. It was less subjective because it's like it's not about, oh, what do I think, is represented in this book? Like, what are the underlying themes? That to me, I wasn't that good at figuring that out. But with math, it's you get an answer. It's clear
Right.
answer, an equation, and then there's an answer. So I think that's with engineers. It's not like there's an agenda per se behind what we're coming up with. We want to find out the truth, and so it's kind of more matter of fact,
Right.
and versus even the interpretation of some of these things that we're seeking. Granted, I'm sure it does manifest in different ways as well in the STEM side of things. Our varying opinions on even different technologies and climate change and nuclear power. Like there's a lot of other topics that I know we're all guilty too of those types of, I guess, subjective injections of our own thoughts and preferences and beliefs. But yeah, I do think that it's different than the lobbyists who have that one point they're trying to get across, in which case it's about who's more persuasive, perhaps,
That's
than maybe.
exactly what it is, and that's not necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily a recipe for success. It's a competition of wits, but in some ways a very distorted way. It's really who can argue better, and I think just as part of human nature, we all like to, be right, but just because one can argue better does not make you one who's right. It just makes you more persuasive, so to say. So that's why, when it comes to, I guess, the comparison of systems here, if we're going to make a metric based on who has more clout per se, I think you need clout anywhere you go, but who can argue better, then we're all decisions. That's what I'm concerned about. Part of me feels like I think I took the wrong degree, growing up, now that I think about it, because I actually ended up liking mathematics at like 35 at the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm like, wow, I actually like this way better. I find it very rewarding. But yeah, like I don't think you're getting the best results that way. So to say, who can argue better? I think it's a good skill, but if that's the system, I think it has certain vulnerabilities where the person who is kind of wittier can, and this is regardless of who knows more than who, the
Mhm.
wittier more, I guess you could say, more mentally, you could say, persuasive person on the spot anyway, can really just spin any or most scenarios, so to say. I mean, which I think is a lot of what advocacy and litigation is. Whereas I do think in engineering that aspect doesn't exist. I do feel for the most part what the data says is what guides the day. I don't think it matters what the mouthpiece is, so to say. Those are my thoughts on that. But is that more or less the case, when working in that space? Like, I don't think it necessarily matters who the most, I guess you could say, who has the better gift of the gab, so to say.
Exactly, especially, in my job, right? I'm selling AI, and I can't make that up. Its results speak for themselves. I can't
Right,
tell somebody, "Oh, look, our product's great. It's better than the other AI platform," unless it is.
right,
So I wanted to make sure that when I chose to work for Vanti, that I was really sure about the technology. But that's like also the beauty of it is that you can do that. It's not subjective. It's
right.
very easy and clear by the results. But there's also too, I guess, this whole theme of who's in charge and how they make decisions. It's kind of a full circle back into the Web3. I guess the birth of Web3 is kind of coming from some of these challenges we're talking about. Like our elected officials in the US have some limitations, and therefore our Web2 hasn't been the most concerned with our privacy, for example. And now we're shifting into Web3, where we're electing kind of people in Web3 to, or not even just people, but the whole decentralized component of where we're taking Web3 and how we're going to have more authority and we'll be more empowered to control our destiny. Whether if it's that sounds extreme, but when it comes to privacy, for example, like we will be able to have more insight into that versus the big tech companies in Web2. And it won't be up to the legislation to figure that out. It'll be up to us in these decentralized applications.
Yeah, and I will have to say, I do think engineers would have been able to mitigate and formulate a plan to deal with the inflation issue far better, to say the least. And I think it goes back to, a true question and answer versus a kind of a advocacy litigation type of banter, which could go on for hours. One of the questions I wanted to ask you on was nuclear power. Now, I remember years and years ago, early 90s, nuclear power was looked at in a much more bullish, more positive light at one point. As far as, removing the world's dependency on, fossil fuels, petroleum and things like that, and also being one that's highly efficient. And, I'm trying to think of my like middle school or high school biology classes, but like nuclear isotopes in some ways take hundreds, if not thousands, of years to break down, so to say. So I'm thinking to myself, like, well, this stuff can last for a very, very long time. We don't necessarily have to worry about it. France, I believe, still to this day is largely powered on nuclear power. What are your thoughts on, let's say, Web3 and the role of nuclear power? Would nuclear power be able to remove a lot of the problems that we're dealing with today? Because I think often, eh, which has been the case, you know, much of societies, plural, are heavily dependent on petroleum, and it seems like it seems very antiquated in many ways. And I do understand the concerns with nuclear power, or having a primarily powered, you could say, province or country on nuclear power. So I wanted to know where we're at in engineering in 2022. Would nuclear power be a feasible solution, for a lot of things? Because I remember clearly as a kid, it seemed to me there was a point that was a serious consideration for the United States. A nuclear power, I don't know if a nuclear power grid is the right term, but a nuclear power infrastructure. So, yeah, to the engineer, uh, what are your thoughts as far as how feasible that could be? in 2022 and maybe beyond. I mean, certainly that would mitigate the energy intensive nature of blockchain operations for sure.
It could mitigate the energy intensive nature of the block. So yeah, as far as having more power for blockchain, is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, that and just kind of society overall.
Right. So yeah, it is a hot topic. I think that though one of the major, I guess, uh, concerns of nuclear power is that the safety level of concern.
Right,
But the biggest safety risk in any thing, to be honest, is human error or humans. So by leveraging, blockchain technology as well as AI and machine learning into, these nuclear power facilities, then maybe that would be a good use case to help eliminate some of that human error in a lot of ways. So I definitely see there is potential for safer nuclear power plants. It's funny though because I'm almost tempted not to even say it that way because they actually are very safe. I know it's when things go wrong, it is very it's a tragedy. We've all, I mean, I don't know if we've all seen all the documentaries on it. Chernobyl, like we've it's a lot,
right, and
but
Fukushima a few years ago,
yeah.
ten
So
10 years ago rather.
but it's the real root cause of safety concerns from nuclear power come from human error. So if we can implement and have like a safety check and a safeguard using technology, that'll really really help mitigate some of those potential risks. And as far as so I think actually the fear of nuclear power has kind of regressed our trajectory in the US, at least, for leveraging that
Wow.
technology. A lot of the nuclear power plants have been, I think, divested from in the past 20, 30 years. I actually used to have one as a customer back in my old job. And but they have very, very, very strict protocols and procedures because of
Right,
all of these concerns. I think that Europe, though, understands the technology and is less afraid of it. They're also more dependent on it, given what you were saying about the petroleum. In the US, we are able to access petroleum from various places. So
right,
we're not as dependent on one or two sources of that, which then leads us to have a bit of an energy crisis and need to go fully into nuclear. But I think that's also a reminder that necessity drives innovation. So if Europe is more reliant on petroleum, they can't get it, that necessity helps them really understand the nuclear technology better. And they kind of have to figure something else out outside of petroleum. Whereas in the US, we've been maybe able to depend on petroleum for so long, it's almost like made us stagnant in other approaches
right,
to energy.
right. And kind of going off of that, I really wanted to know your thoughts on this. So, hydraulic fracking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's essentially shooting very, very concentrated, high-powered liquids downwards into almost like the Earth's crust, and being able to kind of unlock, you could say, concentrated pockets of, I guess, petroleum, so to say. Is that more or less like how the process goes for
Mhm,
fracking?
mhm.
How do you view fracking as somebody who's an engineer and somebody who also used to work at Exxon Mobil? I do feel on one hand, I think like many things, there's misunderstandings, and I think there also needs to be better either articulation or otherwise just kind of messaging of the nuances. But I've come across literature and research as far as fracking and kind of how that will scale and optimize essentially the way power can be extracted and used. And like I said, that can go to various aspects of the U.S. economy. So I kind of wanted to know your thoughts on both kind of the good and the bad, and what the future could kind of hold for that.
So we have a lot of opportunity to take advantage of hydraulic fracking in the US. We have a lot of natural gas pockets throughout the US. In fact, that's a major, I guess, supply of our energy and will be given how much we have.
Right.
Uh, and the technology's come a long way. In the past, it was just a vertical fracking limitation. So when you would drill, you were limited to just directly below where you drilled, and that was it, just one tunnel. But now
Right.
uh, our fracking technology has expanded where we can actually have one point where we drill, and we're not limited just directly beneath us. We can actually expand outward, and we can go horizontal in lines horizontal underneath the surface. So it requires less drilling on the surface. We can actually go horizontally,
Oh
which
wow.
is, yeah, it's a major stepping stone in this world, because that's another big issue of fracking historically, is having all of those points of, I guess, essentially it's a big hole that's exposing natural gas to the environment, right? So
Right.
the more holes we have that do that, it's not great. And the way that we left
Sure.
them back when we didn't have any regulations, in the 70s, let's say, we didn't really properly clean up that mess we made. Now we
Okay.
have regulations, though, that if you're going to be drilling and be extracting the natural gas, then you need to do it in a more responsible way. And also, when you're done, you need to, I guess, kind of, I don't know the right terms anymore, but you need to be able to close up shop properly before you could
Right.
just move away, because that used to be a big issue as far as like the environment was concerned.
Right.
And then I want to make sure, though, I answered your question. Do you mind just like repeating what you were getting to at the end of that?
Yeah, the good and bad of fracking, and the future of it. Because, like I said, and this is something you touched upon already. I would imagine the techniques and the process has been refined over the past 30 plus years, and I'm thinking to myself, if that is an efficient way of extracting, let's say, energy, perhaps we should explore where it is right now and just be honest. What are the good, I guess you say, the advantages from that, and also perhaps the disadvantages. But I think with the disadvantages, let's also be accurate about that, because I do think, this is my opinion, I feel like the word fracking has been thrown around, but a lot of people don't necessarily know what it is, myself included, until I'm like, oh, you know what? I found this book. I bought it. Let me look at it. And I thought to myself, well, this is certainly not the narrative that's being parroted right now. And to be honest, I don't think the average person, or even let's say congressperson, could necessarily articulate just the baseline, definition of this. And I think of the various energy issues. I think we need to have a very open, but just a well-informed, mind about it. So, by the way, I'm not per se one way or the other, but fracking, just the advantages, disadvantages, and what kind of future, or should it have a future in, kind of the way we're going about resolving, various energy issues. I apologize. I know that was kind of a, that was kind of a mouthful there, but
No.
that's overall the question.
Okay, cool. So I was on the right
Yeah.
track. But
Yeah.
so yeah, ultimately, at least in the US, I don't know. I don't know when we thought we were going to run out of oil, but at one point I think like it was projected that it would be 2020. Like, thank goodness that didn't happen.
Right.
Uh, and I think it was in the meantime, between when that was projected and now, obviously, we identified the amount of natural gas resources that we have throughout the U.S., which um, has tremendously helped our ability to produce our own oil and petroleum products and our own energy sources. And that really alleviated a lot of that dependency from outside of our own domestic production. So, as far as the U.S. is concerned, and our ability to produce our own energy here, it's great for us. But the disadvantages, I think, really stem purely around the environment, right? And then also potential health implications, I guess. This is still a disruption to a local environment, right? So
Right.
whatever's happening in that site, if it's not managed well, then it has a potential to impact the local community. If you think about maybe the groundwater, or there's a couple places where there can be potential challenges, but I think overall the technology has evolved a lot where it's not um, what people might be afraid of it anymore. As like it's improved so much that maybe previous concerns um, wouldn't be so
They're
relevant.
almost moot.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So I don't really know the disadvantages besides, those things like the environment, like I mentioned, but those changes in the technologies that we've come up with, again, the legislation was great. Again, the necessity drives innovation. We needed to change our technology because regulation told us we had to. So
Right.
then we did, and then we made better technology that's better for the
Right.
environment and, is way less disruptive. So it's good to have limits on, it's good to put legislation to, create more
Right.
efficient and effective solutions in technology.
Right. And I think that's very well said. And it just seemed like over the course of time, the more stringent regulation did essentially force the industry to create a more safer, effective process, for even fracking, for instance. Well, I think that's very, very promising to to say the very least. And like I said, I do think to a large extent we do need to move more towards a STEM engineering based leadership and expertise in society, even going to our K to 12, you could say educational system here. So as a final question, what are some of the milestones and what are some of the next big things Vanti Analytics has in store for the remainder of this year?
So we're just trying to scale as fast as possible. We're helping our customers scale as fast as possible. We're in a pretty rapid growth phase right now, which is exciting. We just
Yeah,
raised Series A in February. I say just, it's been.
yeah, I saw.
So yeah, we're basically just trying to help manufacturers get on board because, like I said, the ones that can get their start now and start leveraging this technology today are going to have a huge competitive advantage and really be the leaders and in the future as far as whatever industry they're in, the ones that are adapting AI and ML right now and able to do that, especially over the next 5 years, it's going to be a major night and day difference between the ones that don't.
Very, very well said. Well, Kate, I have to say, it was an absolute pleasure having you come on to the show today and really get into the weeds about, AI, machine learning, and engineering. I look at these as very much kind of the fundamentals, I think, society is going to really need to have a greater familiarity with and comfort with as time goes on. And I think it's abundantly apparent to everybody the world is getting more and more complex and probably at a faster rate than any other time, in history. So I think business as usual in anything, that business model is going to have to be thrown out the window. And I think we're really going to have to, change a few things and also kind of recalibrate our thinking with the way we, interact with the world and, and look at things as well. And, like I said, as far as having more engineers and kind of greater STEM subject matter experts in leadership, I do think that is going to move society closer to the goal than the way things have been done so far. So again, Kate, thank you very much for coming on and also explaining all these things and entertaining my very esoteric questions at times. That mostly comes from my interest and in things that you're saying and also things that I recall picking up in my various research. So again, thank you very much, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Vanti Analytics will be doing, in the very near future.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I had such a fun time chatting with you. No, I really enjoyed the questions. Sounds like you're a very curious person as well. So it's
Yes.
a fun dialogue for sure.
Well, much appreciated, Kate. And listen, enjoy your Friday and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.